was an exhilarating intro. Thanks for that, Zane. You were the one who picked that music.
I mean, I do what I can every once in a while.
Oh, actually, do you know what we should do? Actually introduce you to our mainstream to our mainstream listeners. So if you're listening and you're not signed up to our Patreon, then you have missed out on the whole introduction of who Zane is. Zane, I'm just going to let you introduce yourself. It would be much easier. Who are you, Zane?
I am Zane Whitney. I, unfortunately for all of you, can probably tell I'm an American, which means I'm an outcast among interesting individuals. I am currently a PhD student as well in Kansas State University. I'm a military historian, but I'm also not a military historian. You'll learn that about me later on today, actually. I currently am looking at a commando unit of the Second World War, the number 10 Inter-Allied Commando Unit, and looking at allied structures and other aspects with this particular group of individuals. I'm also a documentary filmmaker, and I am a father of twin boys.
And we have Chris.
Hello.
Well, I thought about adding some extra episodes in between you guys having to wait. I think, what is it, like nearly 2 months waiting for our next podcast. So we're going to be bringing you either chats between the three of us. We will be bringing in guests here and there. And then obviously, if you head over to our Patreon for the extra content and sign up, you will get us in a little bit more of a relaxed mood, talking about a lot less serious topics, still historical topics, but a lot less serious, because this podcast is going to be pretty serious, I think.
I can neither confirm nor deny.
Bleak. Definitely bleak.
To be fair, I picked the subject, so it's going to roll this way. Whoever you hear first on this podcast is the person that's chosen the subject. So today, it's my choice, of course. And I've gone down the Polish history road, of course. And we're talking about... I'm slightly being distracted by Chris's children screaming, "Dad," which we won't...
Yes, one moment.
Yeah, Chris is going to step out for a moment. We're going to continue the recording, but Chris's kids are now screaming "Dad," but we will take that out of the recording, obviously. But we are talking about Operation Arsenal, which is basically not Arsenal as in the football team. Before anybody starts jumping down my throat, no, Action Arsenal, which happened in occupied Warsaw. So yeah, I don't know where we should start with this, Zane, because, I don't want to do all the talking. How about we start with what it was like under occupation? I don't know, Zane, do you want to hit off with this one?
I mean, I think it's a good spot to put it. Everything. I would also posit to make sure that our listeners remember in thinking back to our original series that you and Roger and Claire did, which is still available for those of you that haven't listened to it yet. Our Warsaw Uprising Day by Day podcast. So this is before that time period. So we're in 1943. Of course, this is March of 1943, and as Alina often tells you, weather in Poland can be rather crazy. Although, what is it like currently for you in Poland at the moment, weather-wise?
Are you asking in Warsaw or are you asking outside of Warsaw?
Can you provide both? Maybe we'll stick with Warsaw. Since this takes place in Warsaw, why don't we just stick with Warsaw?
Warsaw right now is about 6-7 degrees. It was rainy today, but my parents, who live in the south of Poland, are sending me photographs of snow.
Well, there you go. So it's just like everywhere else. It's a mixed bag, and if you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes or move someplace else. So by this point in 1943, I think it's quite easy and simple to argue that, we're currently under German occupation.
Is it easy? Is German occupation easy? Is it like the French describe that, life pretty much goes on and...
Well, for the French, it's different because you've got the Free French and you've got the Vichy French. And then again, it's also, they're just the French. So life is always somewhat of a rhyme. No, I think it's more of a situation of German occupied Poland, I think is the better way of describing this. Although that can be tricky because then you're excluding the Soviet occupied sections of Poland. So I guess for us, we need to maybe quantify and or clarify which particular groupings of occupation we're discussing today. And I think and obviously because it's Warsaw, then that's traditionally, I don't even know if traditionally is the best word to describe for this, but that is standard, I guess is the better term, for German occupation. Would you agree or disagree?
Well, if we're going to talk about occupation and, Poland being taken apart, half of it is absorbed into the Third Reich and becomes part of Germany. And then the other part is occupied Poland. So Krakow, Warsaw, the major cities that are under, occupied territory, or under the general government, as it's referred to, are pretty similar. So life in the city doesn't really differ much, except for whoever is the police governor, or at the time, because Warsaw police governors change constantly. And the time period we're talking about before the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, which happens in April, literally the next month after what we're talking about. So at the time, we've got Jürgen Strupp, who is the police governor, who, I don't want to say he's the better one, because he isn't. They're all absolutely horrific people. He's marginally, slightly better than the next one that's going to come along, and for sure, I want to cover the next police governor that comes in, because that's another action that we really need to discuss. Or I don't know, maybe people should just come to Warsaw and come on a tour with me, and then you could really find out more about him. Anyway, moving on.
I agree. I guess maybe we should discuss a little more, if possible, about the general government, because it's always I don't know. There's something that was slightly off about calling it the general government. I don't know. Maybe that's just me being an American, being like, "What do you mean general?"
I don't know. Is Chris back yet? Here's the question. Christopher, are you back? Yeah, Chris.
Yeah.
Do you remember who the general governor was of the occupied territories?
Hans Frank.
Oh, banging! What do you know about Hans Frank? Because you know quite a lot.
Well, he was Hitler's lawyer originally. He's a party man. He's not really got any sort of military experience. He hasn't got any really government experience. But yeah, he did the usual occupation thing of living in a palace with his mistress.
See how that
And
works.
well, to be fair, that's what I would do. But I'd actually turn up to meetings from time to time and actually do my damn job properly, uh, which Frank didn't.
I mean, he didn't, but he's also loving the lavish lifestyle that he's living. He's living in the Wawel Castle, for God's sakes. Which one of us wouldn't want to live in Wawel Castle? Obviously, there's too many tourists now. Like, get rid of the tourists first. But
Well, if the tourists are gone, then I'm all for it. The tourists are still there, not so much.
To be fair, technically the Germans were the tourists.
oh yeah, well that's also true.
Now you're getting a little meta for that one, okay?
But also funny, they called, so I don't know how many of our listeners know this, but people who tried to cross the Polish-Slovak, Polish-Czech, all those borders heading down to Romania, those people that were crossing those borders were also called tourists, which I kind of find quite amusing considering we're talking about tourists. So anyway, Hans Frank doesn't do his job properly, but still manages to get the most biggest psychopaths to come into other positions of power and allow them to run rampant and cause mass arrests, mass deportations to concentration camps, labor camps, Palmyra massacres, for example, other various different massacres that are happening, and executions and street executions and roundups. I think a lot of people don't understand. So when I tour guide, sometimes I use this analogy that actually a friend of mine who works at the Auschwitz Museum actually gave me this analogy years ago, and I've run with it forever. If you compare France and Poland, and because there were roundups that were happening in France, obviously, and there are roundups that are happening in Poland. Let's say we average 100 people are arrested in France and 100 people are arrested in Poland. In France, out of that 100 people, 90 of them would get released. 10 of them, you might find yourself some Jews, you might find yourself some resistance members, some homosexuals, people that are bad news according to the Germans. But in Poland, it was the other way around. 90 of them would be sent to prison to then either face interrogation, execution, deportation, and about, if they're lucky, 10 of them might get released because their family members have good connections, or I don't know, they get paid off, or any multiple different reasons. So that's what the occupation, how we can more or less compare those two occupations, if that makes sense. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense to me.
So roundups. But if somebody who doesn't know who a roundup is, do you guys want to explain what a roundup is? Because that might be able to help people understand what I was just talking about.
Standard German thing is there's something happens, so you just go into the nearest area, round up, literally grab a ton of civilians off the street, take them back to Gestapo headquarters, and just interrogate them.
Yeah, cutting off the street. Basically, it's if you watch any of the Polish TV programs that do like the World War II stuff, they portray them really, really well, where you've got people fleeing to try and get into apartment buildings and shops, and people are just like closing everything as fast as possible because nobody wants to be pulled out of wherever they're trying to hide.
There's a really good scene of that description that for those of you that maybe don't get access to Polish TV, but there's actually a really good one from a film from France. And of course, now that I say that, I'm going to forget the name of the film. I believe it's Army of Shadows. And it's the same situation. An action takes place and the Gestapo and everyone else is trying to hunt them down. And this man is going down the streets of Paris, and everyone's already closed their shops up. And it just so happens that one location, the door was open and he was able to slide in. And inadvertently, it was a dance hall for German occupiers, and they were all having fun, and he's just standing there waiting for the group outside to go by before he continues on. So anyway, that's a small offshoot, but if you can't get access to Polish television shows that do this, that's one that you can find on somewhere else, I guess.
Well, have we set the scene? I think we've set the scene pretty decently. Anything else that we should talk about when it comes to Warsaw occupation, or Poland occupation, really, or general government occupation?
Only that Hans Frank had a rival in Fort Albert Forster to the north. They really hated each other.
Oh yeah, because because Forster was sending. This is so ridiculous, right? So territories incorporated into the Third Reich, right, were expelling Polish citizens and Jews because they didn't want them. Because what do they want them in the Third Reich for?
It's a German colony.
Well, this is it. So they're sending them into the occupied territories, and Hans Frank is saying, "Why are you sending me these people? Where am I supposed to house them? How am I supposed to feed them? Take them back." So they're having this war between the two of them. It's so ridiculous. It's like people are crossing borders and not knowing where to go just because they're being expelled and they're losing their homes and everything else. Absolutely ridiculous. Two men with very small penises trying to.
But there's a vital who was actually good at his job, and that's why he didn't understand why Frank kept getting plaudits and getting what he wanted, but he was rubbish at what he did. But Forster was actually, I want to use the word good, but not as in angelic, but he was efficient. Yeah, he was efficient at what he did.
Well, Hans Frank had very interesting friends, like Oscar Derlewanger, who he had dinner with and praised for his courageous, what was it? I can't remember what the words he used, courageous acts during the Warsaw Uprising while he murdered and raped his way across the city.
Mm-hmm. You and everyone else talked very much about Derlewanger in the Day by Day podcast, so our listeners should be familiar with that cheeky fellow.
I like how you use cheeky fellow. I would have used a much harsher word. You're much nicer than I am, or professional.
Well, it's my first go round. I have to ease everyone into my sensibilities here.
Okay, right. Let's talk about what is happening in March. Well, actually, it's realistically what's happening at the beginning. So let me give a bit of context to what's happening at the beginning. So the beginning of 1943, there are a lot of arrests that are happening in and among the Warsaw assault groups. So the Home Army is, at this point, it is the Home Army because it becomes the Home Army in February of 1942. Before that, it was, long story cut short, lots of smaller groups that they're finally joined to become what we know as the Home Army. And this is part of what is to become eventually the Zośka Battalion during the Warsaw Uprising. So if you listened, again, we've referred back to the first season of the podcast. If you listen back to when we talk about the Zośka Battalion, this is like the core, the kind of, what's the word in English? The raw parts of the Zośka Battalion, because before it becomes what it does. So it's actually made up of lots of assault groups. These guys are predominantly made up of the Wawer, small sabotage unit. I think that's the way you translate it. And they're made up usually of young people who are scouts, predominantly scouts. These guys do things like send out propaganda press materials, or if you've ever been to Warsaw and you've come across the pilots memorial, which I don't think I've taken either one of you guys to, which we can do next time we go. It stands sort of like not really in the center. It's on the way to Chopin Airport, and you can see the anchor. The PW, Poland is fighting, Polska Walcząca, and that is apparently been drawn by Jan Bittner, who we're going to talk about, who this is all about. And it was destroyed, obviously, in 1944, but there's photographs from the actual occupation of when he done it. So we can see exactly what it looks like. So they kind of recreated it, they reconstructed the whole memorial, and then kind of made out of metal the PW, the anchor, and they stuck it on there as a kind of like a commemoration. So it still stands. And there's also another apparent, say we don't know for a fact. People walk around and go, oh yes, well, this was definitely done by Jan Bittner. We don't know 100%. It was done by someone from this group where they took a swastika and put it on a hangman's noose. That is still original from the time of the occupation. You will find these things hidden in and around Warsaw. This one specifically is a Mokotów. They would deface things. They would change street names, because this is the other thing. Street names had been changed under occupation, because, you had Adolf Platz instead of Sikorski Platz or whatever. So
Yeah, I mean, it can't be Polish. It's got to be German.
Well, exactly. So they would do that, or they would deface flags. They would write slogans on the wall and things like that. So this is what this group that we're going to be talking about is made up of. Anyway, so literally a couple of days before the date that we're talking about, the Gestapo enter a gentleman called Henryk Ostrowski's apartment. So his wife were arrested. His wife was taken to Auschwitz. She dies there. And Henryk is arrested at the same time, roughly, as Jan Bittner, and I'll let one of you guys take over the story in a second. In his apartment, they find notes, plans, reconnaissance, reports on actions that had already been taken part, future plans. There's a lot of stuff that they have found in this guy's apartment, and he goes under a lot of severe, horrific, brutal interrogation. And then 5 days later, on March the 23rd at 4:30 a.m., Jan Bittner, codename Rude, he is the commander of the Southern Scout Groups. He's arrested. Now, he's arrested alongside his father. Now, before we started this recording, before Chris decided to join the chat, I was chatting to Zane, and I said that I would tell you all a personal story when it comes to Jan Bittner. I met years ago, I met a friend that was, my grandparents knew. He's a guy, he's about my age, and he is the last living relative of Jan Bittner. Basically, Jan Bittner was his grandmother's brother, so like his great uncle, I guess is the right way to refer to him. And his nephew, I guess is the right way. I could never work out which way, to name people. Anyway, his nephew is also a historian. He specializes in, same time period that we do, in Poland, occupation and things like that. And we got chatting, and we realized that both of our great-grandfathers ended up serving in the same platoon in the First World War. First of all, how random. Second of all, he also found photographs of the occupation, and he showed me them, and he said, who do you recognize in this photo? I said, well, I recognize your great uncle. There's Rude. And he said, keep looking. And then right at the end of this group photograph is my great grandmother and my grandfather who fought in the Warsaw Uprising. And I was like to him, I mean, we couldn't work out how they all knew each other till we worked out that, both the great grandfathers fought together, because they lived in the same district, but they went to different schools. They had different friend groups. They were in different scouting troops. They went to different churches. They had different circles of friends. And when it comes down to people that fought in the First World War, especially within the ranks of Józef Piłsudski, people were so close together, and they just all knew each other. It was like this brotherhood, basically. And then when I went to America, I asked my granddad, I was like, who is this? He goes, that's Jan. We used to holiday with them. And I was like, okay. Interesting. So yes, so the reason I rang up my friend this afternoon is because the internet and YouTube videos and everything else are filled with how his great-grandfather died, Stanisław Bittner. And they will say that he died in Auschwitz. He didn't. First of all, my friend went and did a full-blown research into this. He didn't. He was taken out of Auschwitz, taken to a subcamp of Dachau, and he died there in April of 1945. His symbolic grave lies in Pomorski Military Cemetery. So if you ever go out with me, I'll be able to show you where his symbolic grave is. But, there is no grave because they'll never be able to find his body. Anyway, any one of you guys want to take over talking about his arrest?
So yeah, as Alina was saying, About 5 days later, on March 23rd at 4:30 a.m., Jan Bittner, who was considered Officer Cadet Jan Bittner, commander of the Southern Scout groups of assault groups, was arrested. He was arrested, of course, by the Gestapo. They, of course, would search his apartment for several hours. The search would end at about 10 a.m., and he, and together with his father, would be taken to Pavica prison just a few minutes after their arrest. And of course, not long after their arrival, the first interrogations of the two of them would begin. And the very fact that the investigation would begin at Pavica prison and not at the Gestapo building seems to be that there was some awareness on the hands of the Germans that they had an important member of the underground organization on their hands, given that they were not waiting for the Gestapo or to transport them just yet. And I think it's probably because for several weeks, German officers were constantly in his apartment, creating what they would refer to as a cauldron. Now, already in the morning of that same day, on the 23rd, Bittner's sister informed the deputy commander of the Warsaw assault groups and his friend, Tadeusz Zawadzki, about the arrest of Rudy. A combat alarm was immediately ordered in the Centrum and Południe units. Did I get that right, Alina?
Yeah, Centrum. I'm just going to say it's super Polish. Centrum and Południe. But close enough. That's good.
So the decision to liberate the captured individuals was probably greatly influenced by Zawadzki's earlier conversation with Konrad Okolski, who was a scout from the Grey Ranks, which would become important later, who also told Zawadzki about his own experiences during his stay at Pavica prison.
Can I correct you?
Can I? Yeah, of course. Please correct me.
Pawiak.
Pawiak. I thought I was saying it incorrect, but you weren't saying anything yet.
That's okay, don't worry. Our listeners who are Polish may be recoiling right now, but I have now corrected you. So we shall continue with the said correction, but thank you.
And I will apologize in advance. I am working on my Polish as best I can.
Well, Zane, you're doing really well anyway, in general, about your Polish, so don't worry. Chris is a different matter, but we'll come to him in a minute.
So continuing on, Zawadzki contacted Stanisław Bronewski and the chief of the Grey Ranks at headquarters and presented them with a plan of action. The concept of the rescue would be accepted after it was presented by both instructors. I don't really want to give it away until Chris starts to talk, but basically, the acceptance of the action plan is, again, largely determined by contacts who basically had an understanding of what was going on. In particular, it would be Scoutmaster Alina, and I'm going to go ahead and ask you to say this before I butcher her last name.
Danielewiczowa.
Thank you very much. She worked at the patronage for the care of prisoners, and thanks to whom there was contact with these prisoners.
Can I add one more bit of context into this, actually?
Oh, please, absolutely.
So the Home Army actually had contacts, not just this, but they had people that were working as prison guards and things like that were working for the Home Army at the same time. So they had various different ways of getting notes, information, bribes, food, and all sorts of different things to be able to go in and out of this prison. And just one more note. So when we talk about Pawiak, we talk about Pawiak in general. Pawiak was actually made up of two bits. So Pawiak was the men's prison, and Siberia, or Siberia in English, was made up of the women's section, which if you go to Warsaw now doesn't exist, but it's on the opposite side of the major road. So there's a stone there that commemorates that this is where Siberia was. But what's left of the prison now is so minusculely teeny tiny compared to the size of what the prison actually was. Anyway, sorry, continue, Zane.
No, you're good. I always find it fascinating just how much the Home Army and the Polish underground had contacts everywhere to get information, because already, and this is an example of that, I feel like, because already by around 12 o'clock they are starting to receive information that Bittner had been transported in the morning. Like they were already starting to get real on the ground information not long after they're finally coming in and saying, hey, by the way, this is happening, and oh, by the way, we've also heard that they're X, Y, and Z, if that makes sense. Basically what happens is that in turn, Kaczynski visits the Gestapo headquarters every day as a salesman for the Wedel company.
What's the Wedel company?
I'm trying to remember.
You've been to Poland.
I know.
Come on, Zane.
I know. I'm trying to remember.
Okay, should I give you a clue?
Yes, please.
You can drink it. You can eat it.
Whoa. Drink it and eat it.
Potatoes.
Dang
It's a good answer, but no.
it.
No?
Chocolate?
Correct. Wedel is a Polish chocolate company.
Aha. Okay. I thought it was familiar when we were looking into this, but I wasn't quite sure. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, okay.
Just so that's a bit of context for us and context for our listeners.
Which is great because, this individual who would constantly visit every day as a salesman for chocolate would provide valuable information to the underground command. And of course, Krasinski was then the commander of the South District of the Waffer Small Sabotage Organization.
One more note. Why was it called Waver?
See, I didn't know that this was going to be a test.
It is now. I want to tell you why it's called Waver. See, if I asked Roger Morehouse why it's called Waver, he'll be able to answer me because he wrote about this in his book.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. I'm not Roger Morehouse. I wish I was, but I'm not.
Right, so very long story cut short. 26th of December 1939, there was a massacre in Waver, basically, where a police officer was shot, and it's this whole, anyway, it's called the Waver massacre, and it's in honor of the victims of the people that were executed during the Waver massacre. So that's why they're called Waver. So there you go. Sorry. Continue while I keep interrupting you. I don't know if I'm going to interrupt Chris this much. I think he's harder to interrupt.
I don't really want to talk. I think I just my mic's got problems.
It's fine. I like to be interrupted, so it's fun. Bloniewski and
Marciniak.
I was just about to butcher it, and she knew it already. This is why I like Alina. Marciniak?
Correct.
Did I get that correct? Okay. I just want to make sure. Began efforts, of course, to establish contact with the command of the Kedyev AK.
Yes. So Kedev was the special branch of, so basically it was like the daddy of the Waver Small Sabotage Organization. So the Small Sabotage.
Okay, that's what I wanted to ask for clarification. Like, where do they fit in this?
Yeah, so they're all part of the Home Army, but Waver is like the made up predominantly of younger people. Kedev is made up of, I want to say the psychos, but my grandfather was a Kedev member. They are a little bit screw loose, and they did things like took part in assassinations and things like that, and they took out people that were working for the Gestapo, people who'd given up Jews or Poles, people like governors that were executing people, and what was really interesting is, a side note really quickly, sometimes they would send the Warsaw lot to carry out executions in Krakow and the Krakow lot to carry out executions in Warsaw, or they just chop and change different districts of different, it's really, really interesting stuff that they used to do.
Well, I have a small quiz type question for you, Alina.
I don't know, whatever it is.
Well, I don't know. We'll see. So right around the time that we're finding out about 12 o'clock that the information about Bitna being transported in the morning, there's also potentially with the unit we were just talking about, a meeting that's taking place, and it's unsuccessful to discuss an idea of how they're going to organize a rescue. And it's unsuccessful because there's an absence of an individual in Warsaw of the commander. Can you tell us potentially why Commander Jan
Kiwierski?
Yes. Why is it that
codename
if
Lipinski?
he's Lipinski? Why would it be that if he's not present, they would feel uncomfortable in making a decision to organize a rescue?
Because he is the boss, and things don't go after the boss. You have to have the boss to make the final decision at the end of the day, because it's his men that are about to put their lives on the line, and we're going to talk about them actually putting their lives out on the line.
Right. Okay. Just wanted to make sure. I didn't want to be the only one being quizzed today.
Did I get it right, though?
You did, yes. Of course you did, because, I can't really quiz you about Polish history and be like, aha, I caught you, because that's not gonna work.
I'm not perfect at it. We're always learning, trust me. I learned a lot today with a meeting that I had earlier of stuff that I did not know.
Yes, but when the ratio is like 80-20 when it comes to Warsaw specific information during the war. Anyway,
It's okay, don't worry. You will get back at me when we have to talk about, I don't know, some rivets on a boat or something. Anyway, sorry, continue.
Yes. So around the time that meeting is not happening because of the absence of the all-important boss, the commanders of individual squads and sections would inform their colleagues. This is all happening all at the same time very quickly. They would inform their colleagues about the rest of Bitna and inform them about the places of concentration that they would have. And so that's when they really start to decide, essentially, is that the only most experienced and particularly of interest, to me at least, is the oldest scouts would be able to participate in whatever the plan is for the liberation of Bit. So the core would be the membership of the what was known as the Centrum Troop. What would that be in Polish, Alina?
Center troop, centrum.
And of course, they would designate that the participants in this action would include a list of individuals. Would you like to pronounce their names so I don't butcher them and have people laugh at me?
Tadeusz Krzyżewicz, Felix Pendelski, Konrad Okolski, Jan Rodowicz. By the way, Jan Rodowicz, side note, really super side note, I talk about him in the Warsaw Uprising podcast. He is the person...
You jumped the gun on me getting to interrupt you.
Oh, and Józef Saski, but Jan Rodowicz is the guy who basically comes back after the Warsaw Uprising. He makes people from the Zoshka battalion collect all their testimonies and memoirs and things, and he's the person that goes and searches for his fallen comrades. And he's the one that's arrested by the NKVD and the Polish security services actually. And then he, for some strange reason, according to them, jumps out of a window and kills himself. We all know he got pushed. So that's the guy that I talk about in that podcast. He is so amazing, and his brother dies in the Warsaw Uprising as well. So anyway, moving on. Sorry.
No, you're fine. I recognize his name and was going to interrupt you, but you interrupted yourself. It's fine. I was going to say you interrupted yourself, but that's really not what it was. So essentially what's about to happen is, with all this information that's being provided, they start to come up with a concept of what they're going to do and how this attack is going to be taking place. And it's going to get 3 main stages, and I'll give you the main stages and then I'll turn it to Chris. So the stages are going to be detaining the prisoner, eliminating the driver, and of course the guards that are there, and then of course, more importantly, moving our important individual to a provided cab. So, Chris, how exactly does this start to play out?
Well, the sort of the easiest place to catch any kind of convoy is at a road junction, and they're going to hit it at a junction near Pawiak prison, and they've divided themselves into 3 groups. The most important one being the bottle section, which will be armed with, basically Molotov cocktails that they're going to lob at the driver's cab, set the vehicle on fire, cause it to stop, and then they've got 2 Sten detachments armed with Sten guns, although might as well be armed with pistols. Sten guns are rubbish. And they're going to go in, get rid of the guards, and liberate the prisoner, and then try and get them away. But they get everyone organised. I'm not going to try saying the names because it's just embarrassing. But they end up having to wait 2 days because the information they keep getting is that he's already moved first thing in the morning. And they strike on the about 4:45. They get the information on the 26th of March that he's going to be moving, and get themselves ready for a 5 p.m. kickoff, as it were. Yeah, and 5:15, they get the definite that they're on the way, and at 5:30 they strike. So at 5:30 p.m, a whistle's blown as a signal to attack, and then a police officer comes around the corner, and although they try to convince him to offwardly sod, he decides to get a bit more involved and start shooting at them. So they have to start shooting back at him. The Germans then come round the corner, hearing the shots, and he decides instead to turn up, let's give it a go, Nowecki Street, where they're already waiting for them. And so they order the group to charge forward, rush in to attack the cab, which then bursts into flames. But it doesn't stop, which is a bit of a problem. So burning Germans are jumping out of the cab, and then the Sten sections go in and start shooting up at the Gestapo men. They've also got people shooting down from the Arsenal building. Sten Group 2 then join the fight, and at that moment the policeman pops up. He had been wounded in the earlier shootout, and he wounds one of the insurgents in the stomach. 2 Germans had not managed to escape from the prisoners' cells. They're also shooting back at the insurgents, and the fire gets so strong that it causes a stalemate, and they can't get close enough because of the fire, and obviously the Germans can't get out, and there is a breakdown of the attack. So with the vehicle still rolling, which they weren't expecting, and I want to say efficient defense, but they're kind of trapped in a burning vehicle. But the way the Germans defend it actually sort of stifles the attack, so it's actually starts to go horribly, horribly wrong for them. And so they take the initiative and sort of charge the van and the German forces and manage to break in and get him out, with more of the Gestapo getting shot, which is always good.
We've got a quotation actually by Zoshka, codename Zoshka. He writes about the moment in his diary. He says, "When all the prisoners had spilled out onto the street, Yannick appeared from the depths of the wagon, crawling on all fours over the benches. Shaved head, yellow-green face, sunken cheeks, a huge bruise under his eye, blue ears, big eyes wide open looking at us. We grabbed him in our arms. Every time we touched him, he screamed in pain. We dragged him to the car on our shoulders." So the bottom line was he had been so severely tortured, that, to be honest, if I don't they wouldn't have known the extent of his torture, but he wouldn't survive. He doesn't survive. He dies a couple of days later because of the wounds that he sustained under torture. And the really interesting thing is he never gave up a name. Not once. It's really heartbreaking.
I mean, it doesn't really surprise me, given the nature of this individual.
His sister gets a chance to say goodbye.
Well, at least on one level, at least one family member got to, right?
I mean, this quite isn't really the end. I mean, I'll finish this bit off, really. So they retreat along Długa Street, they head towards Krasiński Square, and the groups that are still insurgents that are fleeing, they're still being fired upon. And this actually cuts off their route that they're using to retreat. And at the same time, the commander of the, what is it called, the bottle, the bottle section, Maciej Aleksy Dawidowski, his code name Alek, he is wounded in the stomach. Now Alek is one of, we can say 3 because we can count Rude as one of the people that die. So Alek is one of 3 people that die during this action. Basically, he dies. I think it's off the top of my head. He dies in hospital a couple of days later, at the same time roughly as Rude and one other insurgent who I cannot remember off the top of my head, but it's fine. If I remember, I will say. And they are all buried in, I want to say, unmarked graves, in the sense that they're not buried under their actual names, because you couldn't do that under the occupation. It wasn't possible. It wasn't possible at all. But their names are carried on through Zoshka. So you have Battalion Zoshka with, anyway, it doesn't matter. Their names are carried on, especially throughout the Warsaw Uprising. So, oh no, that was it. Tadeusz Krzyżewicz, he's the other one who dies. He gets wounded in the abdomen, and he's the last one to die. He dies on April the 2nd. Yes. And there's also one more thing that does happen during the retreat. The Germans actually arrest Hubert Lenek, whose codename Hubert, which is odd usually because you don't usually use your real names for code names. So he also undergoes a very brutal investigation. He gets shot in May of 1943. Yeah, it was overall that it was codenamed Mexico 2, and it lasted all in all about 15 minutes. It's one of the longest lasting actions of the Polish underground. 28 people took part in it. 2 were seriously wounded, 1 arrested, and 1 was classed as slightly wounded. So apart from Bitnar and Henryk Ostrowski, of course, who'd been arrested earlier, because he's also released, oddly enough, of the prisoners, and 19 others are released with them. So that's where my maths has gone out the window. 21 people, Bitnar dies, Ostrowski survives, and he actually ends up surviving the Second World War as well. But the one thing is, there is a film, it's called Stones Upon the Rampant, Stones Against the Rampant. I can't remember the translation version of it, but there's a film made of it. It's an alright film, I guess. There's a lot of mistakes in it, but there's also a book written by Alexander Kaminsky, which most children have to read at school. And I had to read it. Stones thrown at the... I don't know, whatever. I can never remember the name of it. Anyway, so on that note, we've been talking, or I've been talking quite a lot. And oh yeah, the one more thing I forgot to add about Paviak Prison is that Paviak Prison is in the middle of the Warsaw Ghetto. So it's not just a prison, but it's a prison within a prison. So that was one more bit of the context that I forgot to add. And it's a bit of a distance between the Gestapo prison and the Paviak prison. Yeah, it's quite a bit of a journey, especially in those days, not so much nowadays, unless you're in Warsaw and there's loads of traffic. One more thing that we do need to add into context is that the day after, on the 27th of March, the Germans shot 140 civilians for reprisals, basically, against this action. So some people say that this action made no sense at the end of the day, saving 20 odd people versus the lives of 140. I don't know. I'll leave that for you guys to think about at the end of the day. On that note, we will be seeing you in 2 weeks' time, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, just before we start off our next season. We might be nice enough to let you all know. Chris is starting to panic. We might be nice enough to let you know what it will be pretty soon. So these extra podcasts are going to come out on a Monday. Our extra content will be out on a Thursday. Head over to our Patreon account and sign up. And you've got loads of content there from our previous season and extra content. And we're going to be talking about, what are we talking about, Chris, in our Patreon?
What of the? I don't know. We're probably going to be talking about some form of Star Wars nonsense, probably.
Excuse me, nonsense is not the word to use with
No.
Star Wars.
No, I know. I translated it for.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
I am cutting the two of you off. We will see you all on the Patreon on the Thursday. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great afternoon. And not sure who's going to be talking and what subjects we're going to be doing next week, but we may let you know on our social media. So thank you so much, everyone.